Welcome to the FFC Top 3, a show where we, your FFC hosts, count things down from 3 to number 1. Thank you for joining us this week. If you have any suggestions for our top 3 topic, please be sure to drop us a note on Twitter at focusfirechat.com, in our Discord, or even email us at focusfirechat@gmail.com. This week, we are going to discuss our top 3 childhood games of all time. So this could be anything from video games to board games to card games to sports. Top 3 games of all time. And I'm actually not going to go first this time. I'm going to make Beard go first since he's been last couple of times.
Oh, of course you're doing that when I've got like a freaking mouthful of food. Thanks.
Chinese food. Chinese food.
Small story. I'm really terrible with my self-care because nobody knew that at all. And I think this is like my second meal all day, so good for me. Anyway, I think my number 3 would actually have to be more of a sentimental one over anything else. And I know it's going to be like kind of passé, but chess. And it's mostly because my dad and I were able to kind of bond over chess a little bit more than I think a lot of sons might be able to. But it was more because I saw them playing 4D chess in Star Trek, and I was like, is there anything like even close to that? He's like, well, I know how to play 4D chess, kind of, but he's like, I don't know if I want to afford, if I can afford like one of those sets. He's like, are you okay with just playing chess and learning that? I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. So like, 6-year-old me is trying to learn the stipulations of chess, and I start to pick up on it, of course, over time. But I think by about 10 years old, I start to really pick up on like all of the rules, nuance, thinking ahead, so on. And it's just one of those games that's like I almost think it's a life lesson at this point with like what it teaches you. So
Nice. Justin, how about you? What's your number 3? Lord.
So my number 3 favorite childhood game was one spring for my birthday. My mom went to a place called Trader's Village, which you won't know unless you're from my area, but basically it's a gigantic flea market with tons of knockoff stuff. Okay. She went to Trader's Village and she got me a bunch of stuff. She got me some Freebox and some Likeys, and she got me some but the coolest thing she got was a set of authentic Everlast boxing gloves. So she got me one set of boxing gloves. So my brother and I, shortly thereafter, would flip a coin. Winner would get right hand, and we would box with our left hand, with our ungloved hand tucked into our belt. And it usually ended in tears, but it's one of my favorite childhood games, and that's number 3.
That is awesome. Oh my God, Blue. You have to follow him. So
yeah, I know. That's a fun one to follow. Mine is actually I'm going to go in kind of line so far. It's actually a one that's more for memory for memories more than actual game. It's a toss up between Parcheesi and Monopoly. And that was because those were both board games that I played with my grandparents. And so my grandmother actually had a very, very, very old Parcheesi board. And I just remember, like, every time we went and visited her, we would play. That's pretty much what we would play. And then Monopoly, just simply because, you want to talk about life lessons. Right? There's nothing better than Monopoly to teach you how to deal with disappointment and patience.
And have to be patient.
And anger and eventually the pleasure of revenge. And how you can only trust yourself. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's Monopoly. I mean, seriously, argue with me. Argue with me on this. Like, this is the lesson of Monopoly.
That should be your experience if you do it right.
Right. I may have gotten my brother to not talk to me for a week after.
Oh
I gave
yeah,
him
like
So if
you ever
I
made it
got
through a game,
I
you
had
shouldn't be talking.
I had growing up, I was a huge Star Wars fan, and one of my most prized possessions was I actually went out and I got a Star Wars Monopoly, which is, they had this was back when they didn't really do a lot of like the theme Monopoly sets. Now, of course, you can throw a rock and you hit like 50, but like this was a big deal. Like they had started doing like these themed sets, and they were always like really nice sets. Because again, they normally you would get like the stupid plastic piece, or if you're really lucky, you got the little metal pieces with like the stupid dog. Everyone wanted to be the car. But like, so I remember getting this set, and it was actually one of the first board games that I remember having that had really, really nice pieces. And they were like pewter Star Wars figures. And so, like, I remember that set. I just remember very, very well from my childhood. Nice. And yeah, you want to talk about siblings getting pissed at each other? That was a violent. it got into a violent game, is what it gets into.
What was the Star Wars equivalent of the race car?
Well, you didn't
X-Wing?
you didn't actually have you didn't have vehicles. You had all the cast. So you had like
I just meant when you play regular Monopoly, everyone wants to be the race car.
Oh, like who wants, like for us, it was Darth Vader.
Okay.
You had Darth Vader, you had Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia was actually there, Han Solo. They did not have Chewbacca, which was a huge issue for me.
Weird.
But the cool thing for me was actually, instead of hotels and houses, they had X-Wings and then Corellian star freighters, and then for the rebels, and then for your Imperials, they had TIE fighters and Imperial star destroyers. So,
okay,
yes, I think I still have that set somewhere, buried somewhere.
Nice.
You guys have like
Green. What about you?
Yeah.
What's your deep memory? Revealing character traits about yourself, which is the entire purpose of this show. Like,
mainly that my family was not very interested in board games, I think, is the moral of the story. I didn't grow up playing really many board games, if any. My family is a bunch of card players,
Oh yeah, don't feel that is actually my number 2 is a card.
Mine was technically child pugilism, so.
This is true.
Bad.
I have one of those too on my list, but my number 3 is actually a game that my grandmother taught me. I lived right behind my grandma growing up, and so after school I would go over to grandma's house, pop a bag of popcorn, grab a can of soda, like pop, generally Dr. Pepper or Pepsi, and we would sit down and we would play cards and watch Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, whatever came on. And that was like my afternoon thing that I'd always do with her. One of the games that is probably fondest for me is like a variant of Spider Solitaire called King's Corner.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And I loved that game. It was simple. It's easy. 7-year-old can learn it. It was great. And it was competitive. Like there weren't too many rules where you can mess with each other. But it was still competitive enough where you have to think ahead. So King's Corner, classic solitaire-like card game. You can play with 4 people. Amazing. It was one of my childhood memories.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. So, Beard. Are we getting another board game?
Well, I was thinking about that because I was like, I could actually, like, for the record, I could probably fill this list with nothing but board games. Because I feel like I have more attachment to them than I did anything else. But I do want to give an actual video game because that's still like one of the most important things in my life, period. My number 1 video game, I think that I like constantly still to this day go back to over and over and over again, and I've kind of talked about it once in a while on this show, is Dead Space. I play it like every year. I have this connection to that game because of the way that it is portrayed, The fact that it does actually showcase itself for a number of my other like sci-fi interests with Alien and so on. It culminates a lot of elements that I just enjoy about video gaming in general, with storytelling, with action, and then also just having those sci-fi elements built into it as well. Like, it is easily one of the best games of all time for me. And I'm not going to say that it would probably be like my number one video game, but it's one of those that, again, has a lot of sentimentality for me, because my sister never really got into too many games, but that was one of them that she was able to sit down and watch me play. Between that, the Silent Hill series, Snatcher as we were growing up, etc., those were games that I was able to sit and play with her, and we connected on quite a bit. So I think for, again, sentimentality and just the means and the background behind it, I really just feel like the guys at Visceral had that game just down pat. It's such a shame what happened to the series, but anyway, yeah, that's my number 2.
Thanks. Justin, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is actually a video game as well, and this was a tough one because there was a good long time there when we got a Super Nintendo where my dad and me and my brother and my mom, to a lesser extent, but not a very much lesser extent, would all gather around and take turns playing the Super Nintendo, which was so weird because not that many other people's parents operated like that. And I loved it. But the game I always looked forward to playing the most out of all of them was a little game called F-Zero. Falcon Punch. It's the best racing game of all time. And a lot of people say Mario Kart 64, and I think if you just went on hours played, that was probably played in my house more than F-Zero. But for me, F-Zero was it was the most unique thing I'd ever seen, because not only were you racing these races, but you picked these drivers. Each one had a little card that dropped down, and each one had a backstory and their own unique looking ship. It was my introduction to lore. I mean, it was very abbreviated. I mean, it was it wasn't Grimoire, but it was just a little bit of flavor that kind of, I always got the super chubby dude with the wide ship. That's what I got. Just trying not to body shame an F-Zero character at this point, but yeah, F-Zero for me is my second favorite, and that is very close to Mario Kart 64 and probably a couple other video games, but F-Zero for me is the best.
Blue?
Mine would actually be a card game, and it would be Gin Rummy. Very, very similar to your story, Green. Mine was my family, I grew up on a ranch, and one of our biggest things that we did was trail rides. So growing up, it was, that was a very, very common thing. I mean, we probably went on at least 2 trail rides a month. And that was kind of, again, that was kind of the thing you did. And anyone who's been on a trail ride knows there's not a lot or anybody who's been camping actually knows that there's not a lot to do when there's no electricity. But card games were like the universal, like you can do them anywhere. You can do them in the car. You can, you can play whatever. And so we would always, it just always came back to Gin Rummy. Like that was just one of the games that we just constantly played growing up. And obviously, as anyone who's played Rummy knows, that generally results in a very unique rule set. And it got super competitive as always, especially with, 3, it was myself and then my brother and sister who mostly were very competitive. And I mean, like to this day, I still love playing Rummy. Rummy is like
Oh,
one
yeah.
of hands down just the easiest game. You can sit down and it's one of those games that kind of like what you were saying with the King's Corner. It's just one of those games that like you can sit down and within 5 minutes explain to someone this is a basic principle of the game. Go, and within one or two hands, most people can pick it up pretty well. It's not like a super complex game, but just oh my gosh, so much fun, so much fun.
Nice. So my number 2 actually lies more along Justin's number 3, because I grew up partially on a farm, and there's not a whole lot of things you can do out there besides work. And so my brothers and I have 3 siblings, 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. Sister was 7 years younger, so we didn't do a whole lot of playing together because she was like 4 at the time. But my brothers and I would get a stick and get a basketball, and we'd draw ourselves across on the dirt road, and we would play Foursquare. And
Oh my god, Foursquare! You violent competitive game.
The fights that would happen because you may accidentally like bounce the ball right on the line instead of getting it into the other person's square.
No treetops.
No treetop. It always devolved into a brutal form of dodgeball.
Mm-hmm. I may have a BB in the back of my leg, or at least a BB scar in the back of my leg, because my brother got so mad after a game of Foursquare, he went and got his BB gun and shot me in the back of my leg as I'm running away, screaming at the top of my lungs for my mother. I ended up winning, by the way, so it's fine. It's totally fine. But yes,
Foursquare was the one that they took away dodgeball. You remember when they took away dodgeball in elementary school because it was quote unquote too violent? Well, they let us replace dodgeball with Foursquare. Oh my god, they regretted that decision so much. It was like I remember like one of the PE teachers being like, "What? How is this? How is this more violent than dodgeball?
More brutal because you're closer."
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, but yeah. That's definitely my number 2. Down to our number 1s, though. Beard, you want to kick this top childhood memory game?
Mm-hmm. Hang on, I'm showing.
Okay. I
There
will.
we go.
I will.
There we go.
Okay.
So I'm about to make a lot of people mad, but I was introduced to this game. Yeah, I know, like me making people mad, that's like what I do on a daily basis anymore. But I was introduced to this game in I guess it was the tail end of middle school. A friend of mine ended up telling us about it. It's just one of those games that always just sticks with you, right? It's one of those that you always go back to and you always think about. And obviously, I've been talking about it, which means you've already lost.
I hate you so
what?
much.
What?
I hate you so much.
Yes! I got somebody at least. All right. So out of middle school, some people will understand what I mean by this. The internet was a new thing by the time that I was in middle school. Yes, I'll go get my cane and everybody can have a fun laugh about it. But that being said, the internet was kind of new around middle school, and one of the things that started to circulate around middle school was this idea of the game. Now, the game just has the name. That's really it. The whole objective of the game, and this is also great because I'm indoctrinating so many people into this game right now if you've never heard of this before. The entire idea of the game is to not think of the game. If you think of the game, you've already lost. If you already understand what the game is, then you've already lost. If it's this concept and idea that you end up not thinking about the game whatsoever, then you basically win the game. But here's the problem. If you think about winning the game, you've lost the game because you thought about the game.
I think I lost.
Yes.
I am just lost, so I don't know if I lost or not.
It's basically a reverse psychology game, is what it is.
to make you think about it.
Yeah,
It's like when somebody sneezes.
Beard is a
like
Reaper from Mass Effect.
Yeah, there you go. It's like the game where you say when somebody sneezes, somebody in the room is thinking about Abraham Lincoln. And somebody goes, what, really? Well, yeah, now you will.
And now you will. Exactly. Yeah, it's just a psychological game, but quite frankly, it is it's the thing, of course, that has been sticking with me since, like I said, middle school at this point. And I'm into my 30s at this point, and I will simply say that it is the one thing I can think about now and again and just be like, why did I do that?
That's funny. Scarring, yet stays with you forever.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's one of those things. You know, it's a fond memory of childhood, and it always will be there for me. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, though. Let's be honest.
I mean, stop thinking about it, Justin.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, hey, Blue, stop thinking about it.
All it reminds me of is, have you guys listened to Rabbits, the podcast Rabbits?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
that's.
was about to say.
It's
No, they
all-
usually hop away before I can get in a good listen.
Wow.
But I think is it Pacific Northwest? I think is the company that put that on. Oh my god! If you haven't listened to that podcast, go do yourself a favor and listen to it. It's actually a really fast listen, but it's along the lines of it. It's a lot more darker, but it's a very similar concept.
Blue Clue. Blues Clues. Blues Clues.
I'm showing you hidden aspects of your psyche that you didn't even know existed. Justin, what's your number one?
My number one is a card game, but it was so pervasive throughout my childhood that it has to be number one. And it was a card game with a special deck of cards. It wasn't a card game with a normal deck of cards.
If you're saying the game, you're saying you.
No, yeah, I almost guarantee it's not the one either one I'm thinking about. It's called Skip-Bo.
Oh, okay. Man, I
That's
haven't heard
a good
of
one,
Skip-Bo.
too.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Skip-Bo.
Is legit. That was the game of choice of my grandmother. And basically you just actually I didn't know this. I just learned this trying to research the rules because I couldn't exactly remember the rules, but it's actually the commercial version of a regular card game called Spite and Malice, and that sums it up. Pretty much scums it up. Yeah, it was a really cool card game. But basically, first one to go out wins. It's one of those type of games. But it's one of those. All you need is that one little deck of cards, and you can basically keep 4 to 5 people
trying to kill each other.
Like 3 hours. The games were cutthroat and they were very long.
Not quite as long as Monopoly, though.
Well, no, but
it depends on how competitive you got.
Who wants to do that to themselves?
That's true. That is true. Blue, what's your number one?
My number one is actually going to be pretty much a collection of random tabletop RPGs, but predominantly D&D. Nice. And that is simply because I was introduced to D&D at not like a super young age, but I think it was like middle school. Beginning of middle school was when I was kind of introduced to it. And I was introduced to it as a form of freeform theater. So it actually wasn't necessarily role-playing, it wasn't a stat game as much as it was a way of learning how to do different interactions. And it was basically a role-playing, like it was solely role-playing. And it really kind of just, it really introduced me to the beauty of stories and inside games. Like it stressed, it put in my mind the stress that I place in getting a good story out of a game. It's also probably why I enjoy playing solo player games so much, is because that allows you to kind of get more immersed in it. But I just remember D&D was, it just was the gateway drug, I guess you would, for me into the deeper world of gaming in general, both video game and and tabletop board gaming and stuff like that. Because I mean, there actually are now today. There are some role playing board games out there that are pretty well done. So, but yeah, D&D is definitely my number one go to for games with fond memories.
Nice. My number, okay, so you were talking about how gin rummy was your family's go-to on trail rides. My number one actually is very much so related to gin rummy. I was going over to my grandmother's earlier, and I spent a lot of time over there growing up. And I have a great aunt who is a nun somewhere here in Colorado. Don't know where. She would come down to Plains, Kansas, where I grew up, and she would teach my grandmother a new type of rummy. And so she would teach all these different types. I've learned Texas rummy, heaven and hell rummy, all the different rule variants you could possibly get with it. Mm-hmm. Well, one time she brought back a very specific type of rummy that I and the rest of my family, we all have a deck of this specific type of rummy. You can take it anywhere. You can buy it at Walmart. You can buy it at Target. It is still the easiest introduction to a rummy style game without actually being rummy. I've played it thousands of times, I swear. Phase 10. Phase 10 was the one game I played the most growing up, period. And it's probably the one that I learned how to be more crafty and block people by sacrificing my own hand as much as possible. Of course, my grandmother would try to change the rules all the time. But, it's fine if you can get away with it. But that is the top 3 for this week. Next week, I actually wanted to do something a little bit different, get away from games. I want to go into the realm of food.
Oh, no.
You ready? We're going to do top 3 sandwiches next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that one's easy.
I just got back. What?
We're going to do top 3 sandwiches next week, buddy. Yeah, we're talking about food next week.
We're talking about food.
I want to go to there. First of all,
do hot dogs count?
First of all, can we set some ground rules? First of all,
nope.
Hot dogs are hot dogs.
We're gonna have this debate next week.
If you want to have top 3 hot dogs, then you can do that. But then if someone says hot dog, my next one is gonna be pizza.
If you can argue it's a sandwich in a reasonable way, I will count it as a sandwich.
Okay.
Is a Philly cheesesteak a sandwich?
Okay. When we do top 3 cookies, are you going to say bagel?
I might say cannoli.
That's not a cookie!